The medical bay of the Starship Perseverance hummed with the quiet efficiency of advanced alien technology. Dr. Marcus Chen sat hunched over his workstation, his tired eyes scanning through endless streams of data on his holographic display. 3 months into humanity's first diplomatic mission to the Zephyrian homeworld, and he was still trying to understand the complex biology of their hosts. The Zephyrians were unlike anything humanity had ever encountered. Standing nearly 8 feet tall, their crystalline skin shifted colors with their emotions, and their forearms moved with a grace that seemed almost supernatural. What fascinated Marcus most was their unique physiology. They were empathic beings who could literally absorb pain and suffering from other species through direct physical contact. "Another sleepless night, Doctor?" The voice belonged to Captain Sarah Rodriguez, who had entered the medical bay with her usual quiet authority. Marcus rubbed his eyes and turned to face her. "The data from our cultural exchange sessions is incredible, Captain. The Zephyrians don't just feel empathy, they can physically take on the pain of others. It's not metaphorical. Their nervous system actually processes and neutralizes suffering." The captain nodded thoughtfully. She had witnessed this firsthand during their arrival ceremony, when a young Zephyrian had touched a wounded human marine and somehow healed his injuries while taking on a brief moment of visible distress herself. "Speaking of which," Sarah continued, "Ambassador Veltar has requested another private session with you tomorrow. The Council of Resonance seems particularly interested in human emotional patterns." Marcus had been conducting these sessions for weeks now. Ambassador Veltar, a particularly striking Zephyrian with skin that shimmered between deep blues and silver, had been studying human psychology and physiology with an intensity that both intrigued and unnerved him. Their conversations had grown increasingly personal, touching on subjects that went far beyond standard diplomatic protocols. The next evening, Marcus waited in his quarters as requested. The ship's artificial lighting had been dimmed to accommodate Zephyrian preferences, casting long shadows across the sparse military accommodations. When the door chimed, he called for entry, expecting the usual formal greeting. Instead, Ambassador Veltar entered in complete silence. Marcus had never seen a Zephyrian move with such deliberate purpose. Veltar's usually shimmering skin had taken on a deep, steady gold, a color Marcus had learned indicated profound determination and focus. Her forearms hung gracefully at her sides, and her large, multifaceted eyes held an intensity that made Marcus's breath catch. Without speaking, without the customary exchange of formal gestures that typically began their meetings, Veltar began to remove the elaborate ceremonial garments that marked her diplomatic status. The intricate fabric panels fell away piece by piece, revealing the natural beauty of her crystalline form. Marcus stood frozen, his scientific mind racing to understand what was happening while his human instincts told him this was something far beyond his usual experience. "Ambassador, I don't understand." Veltar raised one slender hand, and Marcus fell silent. Her skin pulsed with warm golden light as she approached him, her movements fluid and unhesitating. When she reached him, she gently placed her 4 hands on his shoulders, his chest, his face. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. Every ache in Marcus's body, the tension in his shoulders from hunching over data screens, the persistent headache from irregular sleep cycles, the emotional exhaustion from months of careful diplomatic dancing, all of it began to flow out of him and into her. He could feel the stress and pain leaving his body like water draining from a vessel. But, more than that, he could sense Veltar's emotions through their contact. There was no romantic desire in her actions, no personal agenda. Instead, there was something Marcus could only describe as pure compassion, a deep, species-spanning empathy that transcended any individual want or need. Through their physical connection, images and concepts flowed between them. Marcus saw through Veltar's memories how the Zephyrians had first evolved their empathic abilities. In the harsh early days of their civilization, when their world was racked by natural disasters and conflicts, those who could absorb and neutralize the suffering of others had become the healers, the peacemakers, the ones who held their society together. Veltar wrapped her arms around Marcus, pulling him close to her crystalline form. Her skin was warm despite its mineral appearance, and he could feel a gentle vibration, almost like a purr, emanating from her chest. As she held him, more of his accumulated stress and loneliness flowed into her, processed and dissolved by her alien nervous system. "Your species carries so much pain," Veltar spoke for the first time, her voice a harmonic blend of tones that seemed to resonate in Marcus's bones. Even now, in this moment of peace between our peoples, you hold the weight of your world's suffering. Marcus found himself relaxing completely for the first time in months. The constant vigilance required in first contact situations, the pressure of representing humanity, the isolation of being light years from home, all of it was being gently drawn away by this extraordinary being. Why, he managed to ask. Veltar's skin shifted to a soft blue-green, which Marcus had learned indicated thoughtfulness. Because you have given my people something we never expected to receive: hope. Your species' resilience, your determination to reach out across the void despite your own pain and conflicts, it shows us that suffering need not define a civilization. Through their contact, Marcus began to understand the deeper purpose of this gesture. The Zephyrians had spent millennia perfecting their ability to absorb suffering, but they had never encountered a species quite like humanity. Humans seemed to carry their pain differently, not as a burden that crushed them, but as fuel that drove them forward. Your people fight through pain rather than simply enduring it, Veltar continued, her arms tightening around him in what he realized was a protective embrace. You transform suffering into strength, loss into determination. This is not weakness, it is the most powerful force my people have ever encountered. Marcus felt a profound sense of understanding pass between them. This wasn't about romance or physical desire. This was about recognition, one sapient being acknowledging another's struggle and offering what comfort they could provide. It was empathy in its purest form, transcending species boundaries and cultural differences. As Veltar held him, Marcus realized that this moment would change everything about the relationship between their species. The formal diplomatic protocols, the careful cultural exchanges, the scientific studies, all of that had been necessary groundwork. But this was the real first contact between humanity and the Zephyrians, two beings from different worlds recognizing the fundamental similarity of consciousness and compassion that united all sapient life. The golden glow of Veltar's skin gradually shifted to a warm silver, and Marcus understood that she had absorbed what pain she could from him. He felt lighter than he had in years, not just physically but emotionally. The crushing weight of responsibility that came with representing his entire species had been shared, distributed, made bearable. "Thank you," he whispered, the words inadequate for what had just transpired. Veltar's response came not in words but in a gentle pulse of warmth through their continued contact, an alien expression of understanding and mutual respect that needed no translation. Outside the porthole of Marcus's quarters, the stars wheeled silently in the void, bearing witness to a moment that would reshape the future of two civilizations. What had begun as a diplomatic mission was evolving into something far more profound, a true meeting of minds and hearts across the vast darkness of space. The embrace continued, two beings from different worlds finding common ground in the universal language of compassion and shared understanding. Word of what had transpired between Dr. Chen and Ambassador Veltar spread through the ship's crew with the speed that only military gossip could achieve. Captain Rodriguez found herself fielding questions from confused subordinates who weren't sure if they had witnessed a diplomatic breakthrough or a serious protocol violation. Marcus himself seemed transformed by the experience. The dark circles under his eyes had vanished, his posture had straightened, and he moved with an energy that his colleagues hadn't seen since before their departure from Earth. More importantly, his research had taken on a new depth and understanding that impressed even the most skeptical members of the scientific team. The implications are staggering, Marcus explained to the senior staff during their morning briefing. What Ambassador Veltar did wasn't just pain absorption, it was a complete neural interface. For those few hours, we shared consciousness. I experienced memories and emotions that belonged to her entire species. Commander Hayes, the ship's security chief, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Doctor, with all due respect, that sounds like a significant security risk. What information about humanity might you have inadvertently shared?" The question had been weighing on Marcus's mind as well. Through his connection with Veltar, he had sensed her accessing some of his memories, glimpses of Earth, flashes of human history, emotional responses to various stimuli. But, rather than feeling violated, he had sensed her profound respect for what she was witnessing. "Commander, what I shared with her wasn't classified information or strategic data. She experienced what it feels like to be human. The weight of individual consciousness, the drive to protect those we love, the way we process loss and turn it into motivation. If anything, I believe it strengthened her respect for our species." Captain Rodriguez leaned forward. Dr. Chen, we've received a formal request from the Zephyrian Council of Resonance. They want to expand these interactions to include other members of both crews. They're calling it the Harmony Protocol. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. First contact situations were delicate enough without adding intimate physical and emotional connections between species. They're not asking for everyone, Rodriguez continued. Just volunteers from both sides who are willing to undergo what they term consciousness bridging. The Zephyrians believe it's the fastest way to build true understanding between our peoples. Dr. Sarah Kim, the ship's xenobiologist, spoke up. Captain, from a scientific standpoint, the research potential is incredible. We could learn more about Zephyrian society and biology in a few weeks than we might discover through years of conventional study. Over the following days, a small group of volunteers from both species began participating in the Harmony Protocol sessions. Each interaction was different, reflecting the unique personalities and experiences of those involved. Lieutenant Commander Jackson, a veteran of the Mars colonies, found his session with a young Zephyrian engineer to be profoundly healing. The alien absorbed the persistent pain from an old combat injury, but, more significantly, helped Jackson process the survivor's guilt he'd carried for years after losing his squad in a reactor breach. The Zephyrian engineer, whose name translated roughly to Whisper of Distant Stars, experienced through Jackson's memories the incredible human capacity for self-sacrifice and loyalty. The concept of humans willingly risking their lives for strangers was something that resonated deeply with Zephyrian values. Dr. Kim's session with a Zephyrian scientist named Echo across time focused more on intellectual exchange. As Echo absorbed Kim's academic stress and professional frustrations, Kim gained access to revolutionary concepts in biology that the Zephyrians had developed over millennia. But it was the session between Chief Petty Officer Maria Santos and an elderly Zephyrian called Guardian of Small Hopes that provided the most unexpected insights. Santos had volunteered reluctantly, driven more by curiosity than any particular need for healing. She was known throughout the ship for her resilience and unflappable demeanor. What Guardian discovered when they connected, however, was the enormous emotional burden Santos carried as the ship's unofficial counselor and confidant. For years, Santos had been the person other crew members turned to with their problems, fears, and homesickness. She absorbed their pain through listening and support, much like the Zephyrians did through physical contact. The difference was that Santos had no natural mechanism for processing and releasing that accumulated suffering. Guardian's skin shifted through a complex pattern of colors as they experienced Santos's memories, thousands of conversations, countless moments of providing comfort to others while never seeking it for herself. The Zephyrian was amazed by this human's capacity for emotional strength and selfless support. Your species, Guardian communicated through their connection, you are natural empaths. But, you lack our biological mechanisms for processing pain. You carry it instead, transform it into strength for others. Through Guardian's healing touch, Santos felt decades of accumulated emotional weight lifting from her shoulders. She had never realized how much she had been carrying until it was gone. But, more than that, she gained an understanding of how her role as an unofficial healer connected her to the Zephyrian purpose. These sessions began to reveal something that neither species had fully understood about themselves. Humans, despite lacking the Zephyrians' biological empathic abilities, had developed their own forms of emotional healing and support. They created complex social structures, art, music, and literature specifically designed to process and transform suffering into something meaningful. The Zephyrians were fascinated by human concepts like gallows humor, the ability to find laughter in the darkest circumstances. They marveled at human music, which seemed to transform sadness into beauty. Human literature, with its focus on overcoming adversity and finding meaning in struggle, was completely alien to a species that simply absorbed and neutralized pain. We have spent so long focusing on removing suffering that we never learned to transform it, Veltar confided to Marcus during one of their private conversations. Your species has turned pain into art, loss into motivation, fear into courage. This is not a weakness to be healed, it is a strength to be celebrated. The exchange was not one-sided. Humans participating in the Harmony Protocol gained access to Zephyrian techniques for emotional regulation and stress management. They learned to recognize and release tension patterns they had carried for years. More importantly, they gained a new perspective on their own resilience. Captain Rodriguez, who had initially been skeptical of the program, found herself volunteering for a session with the Zephyrian ship's commander, Silence Between Stars. The connection revealed the incredible burden of command that both leaders carried, but also the different ways their species handled responsibility and decision-making. Through Silence's perspective, Rodriguez gained insight into collaborative leadership styles that could benefit human command structures. In return, Silence experienced the human concept of mission above self, the willingness to make difficult decisions that might cause personal pain but served the greater good. The data from these sessions was unprecedented in the history of interspecies contact. Rather than simply learning about each other's technologies or social structures, the two species were gaining direct access to each other's emotional and psychological frameworks. Dr. Chen compiled his observations into a comprehensive report that would reshape humanity's understanding of empathy and consciousness. The Zephyrians, meanwhile, began developing new philosophical concepts based on their exposure to human resilience and transformation of suffering. What had started as a simple diplomatic mission was evolving into something unprecedented, a true melding of civilizations that maintained the unique strengths of each while creating new possibilities for both. As the sessions continued, both crews began to notice changes in themselves and their relationships with each other. Humans who had participated in the Harmony Protocol showed improved emotional regulation and stress management. They also displayed a deeper understanding of their own psychological processes and a greater appreciation for their species' unique strengths. The Zephyrians, meanwhile, began experimenting with human-inspired methods of processing emotions. They started creating their own forms of art and expression, transforming their absorbed pain into creative works rather than simply neutralizing it. The boundaries between healer and patient, between species and individual consciousness, were blurring in ways that neither group had anticipated. They were creating something entirely new, a hybrid understanding of emotion and empathy that drew from the strengths of both civilizations. The transformation of both ships had become impossible to ignore. Where once there had been two distinct crews operating under careful diplomatic protocols, there was now something approaching a true hybrid community. Humans and Zephyrians worked side by side, their understanding of each other deepened by the intimate connections forged through the Harmony Protocol. Dr. Chen found himself at the center of what was becoming the most significant development in interspecies relations in human history. His daily reports to Earth had evolved from simple diplomatic updates to detailed analyses of consciousness, empathy, and the fundamental nature of sentient experience. The traditional models of first contact assume that species will remain fundamentally separate, he recorded in his latest transmission. What we're witnessing here suggests that consciousness itself may be more fluid and interconnected than we ever imagined. The barriers between individual minds, even across species lines, appear to be more permeable than previously thought. The changes went beyond the participants in the Harmony Protocol. The entire atmosphere aboard both ships had shifted. Conflicts that might have escalated into serious diplomatic incidents were now resolved through a combination of human negotiation techniques and Zephyrian empathic understanding. Technical problems that had stumped engineers from one species were solved through collaborative approaches that drew on both sets of experiences. Ambassador Veltar had become more than a diplomatic representative. She was evolving into something like a cultural bridge, her consciousness expanded by the human experiences she had absorbed and her perspective enriched by exposure to human concepts of growth through adversity. Marcus, she said during one of their regular sessions, my people have made a decision that will surprise both our governments. They were in the ship's observation lounge, watching the swirl of hyperspace outside the massive viewports. Veltar's skin had taken on the deep blue coloration that indicated serious contemplation. The Council of Resonance has voted to propose a permanent merger of our research and exploration programs. Not just cooperation, true integration. Mixed crews, shared technologies, combined approaches to problem solving. Marcus felt his pulse quicken. The implications were staggering. Veltar, that would change everything. Both of our societies would need to completely restructure their approaches to space exploration, to science, to contact with other species. Veltar's forearms moved in the graceful gesture that Marcus had learned indicated deep conviction. We have learned something from your species that we never understood before. Suffering and struggle are not obstacles to be removed, they are forces that can drive growth and innovation. By absorbing pain, we have been limiting our own development. She turned to face him fully, her multifaceted eyes reflecting the swirling energies of hyperspace. Your people transform their pain into art, into motivation, into strength. Our people neutralize pain but rarely grow from it. Together, we could create something unprecedented, a civilization that can both heal suffering and use it as a catalyst for advancement. The proposal would require approval from both governments, but the preliminary discussions were already showing promise. Earth's leaders were fascinated by the Zephyrian healing abilities and their potential applications for human medical science. The Zephyrian Council was equally intrigued by human resilience and innovation. However, not everyone was enthusiastic about the rapid pace of integration. Commander Hayes had filed several reports expressing concern about the loss of human cultural identity and the potential security implications of such intimate contact with an alien species. Captain, Hayes addressed Rodriguez during a private meeting. I understand the scientific value of these exchanges, but we're fundamentally changing what it means to be human. Some of our people are starting to think and react more like Zephyrians. Where does it end? It was a valid concern, and one that Rodriguez had been wrestling with herself. The humans who had participated in multiple Harmony Protocol sessions did seem different, calmer, more empathetic, but also somehow less distinctly human in their responses to challenges and conflicts. Commander, I've been monitoring the psychological profiles of all participants, Dr. Chen interjected. He had been invited to the meeting specifically to address these concerns. What we're seeing isn't a loss of human identity, it's an expansion of it. The participants aren't becoming Zephyrians. They're becoming something new. Chen pulled up holographic displays showing brain scans and psychological assessments. Look at Lieutenant Santos. Her stress responses have improved dramatically, but her decision-making patterns are still distinctly human. She's retained her tendency toward protective leadership and self-sacrifice, but now she has better tools for managing the emotional cost. The data was compelling, but Hayes remained skeptical. Doctor, what happens when we return to Earth? How do we explain to humanity that their representatives have undergone fundamental psychological changes? The question highlighted one of the central challenges facing the mission. They weren't just establishing diplomatic relations, they were potentially creating a new form of human consciousness that Earth's population had never experienced. Captain Rodriguez made the decision to expand the Harmony Protocol to include detailed documentation of all changes and effects. If humanity was going to evolve through contact with the Zephyrians, it needed to be a conscious, informed choice rather than an unintended consequence. Over the following weeks, both crews worked together to develop comprehensive protocols for controlled consciousness bridging. They established safeguards to preserve core identity markers while allowing for beneficial psychological and emotional growth. The results exceeded everyone's expectations. Humans participating in the refined protocol retained their essential humanity while gaining access to Zephyrian emotional regulation techniques. Zephyrians, meanwhile, began developing human-inspired abilities to transform absorbed pain into creative and innovative insights. Dr. Kim, working with her Zephyrian counterpart Echo across time, made a breakthrough in understanding the neurological basis for consciousness bridging. They discovered that the process wasn't truly telepathic, instead, it involved synchronized electromagnetic fields that allowed for the sharing of emotional and sensory experiences. This changes everything, Kim reported to the assembled senior staff from both ships. If we can understand the mechanism, we can potentially extend these benefits to people who haven't had direct contact with Zephyrians. We could develop technological interfaces that provide similar effects. The implications were staggering. If the consciousness bridging effect could be replicated technologically, it could revolutionize human psychology, medicine, and social interaction. Mental health treatment could be transformed by allowing therapists to directly experience and help process their patients' emotional states. Ambassador Veltar had been working with Captain Rodriguez to draft a formal proposal for their respective governments. The document they produced was unlike anything in the history of interspecies relations. We propose not merely an alliance or trade agreement, Veltar explained during a joint transmission to both homeworlds, but a true symbiosis of civilizations. Humans and Zephyrians working together as integrated crews, sharing consciousness and experience, pushing the boundaries of what either species could achieve alone. The proposal included detailed protocols for cultural preservation, safeguards against unwanted psychological changes, and frameworks for gradual integration that would allow both societies to adapt at their own pace. Dr. Chen's final personal log entry before their return journey captured the profound transformation that had occurred. What began as a diplomatic mission has become something unprecedented in the history of either species. We've discovered that consciousness itself may be the ultimate frontier, not the void between stars, but the space between minds. The Harmony Protocol has shown us that empathy, compassion, and understanding can transcend not just cultural barriers, but the fundamental boundaries of individual identity. As both ships prepared for their return to their respective homeworlds, the crews had become something entirely new. They were no longer simply humans and Zephyrians working together, they were pioneers of a new form of consciousness that drew strength from both healer and warrior traditions. The stars that had seemed so cold and distant when they began their journey now felt like bridges between worlds, pathways to infinite possibility. Humanity had reached out across the void not just to find other life, but to discover new ways of being alive. When the ships finally emerged from hyperspace within sight of Earth and the Zephyrian homeworld, they carried with them more than diplomatic treaties or scientific data. They carried the promise of a future where consciousness itself could evolve, where empathy could bridge any divide, and where the pain and joy of existence could be shared across the infinite diversity of thinking beings. The embrace that had begun between Dr. Chen and Ambassador Veltar had grown to encompass entire civilizations, proving that sometimes the most profound connections require nothing more than the willingness to open oneself completely to another's experience. In learning to share their deepest selves, both species had discovered that they were capable of becoming far more than either had ever imagined possible. The universe suddenly seemed far less lonely and infinitely more hopeful.